Welcome to the latest Land of 10 Iowa Facebook Live session. I am Iowa reporter Bobby Legess. Welcome, everyone, to the latest session here. As always, if you have any questions, football, basketball, brackets, whatever, feel free to put them in the comments section. We'll go over them. The best Facebook Lives we always have involve the interaction with the audience we have here. So I'll kick it off here until then, talking about a story I wrote this week on Noah Fenske, the latest 2019 offensive line commitment. Interesting thing, the kid committed in early March. I believe it was the 2nd. He took a visit to the school with his parents, and Iowa set up for him to meet Marshall Yanda. And for most kids, meeting a 6-time NFL All-Pro is a pretty big deal. For Noah, it turned into the reason why he committed to Iowa on the spot that day. The two chatted for 15 minutes. It was as Noah put it, a small-town conversation you'd have with anybody else in any small town. They talked a little football. They talked life. They talked about their passions and their families and how you kind of the big moments in your life, things like that. And by the time Noah was done, he realized that everything he wanted, Iowa had in a program where he wanted to go. Iowa could get him there, kind of like it did for Yanda. So I think if you're Iowa, you consider that the best move you've done in recruiting probably in a little while. Otherwise, we got some questions starting to chime in here. So we'll get to that. Delbert says, will the running attack be good? Good question. My thought on that is tied into if Iowa can successfully find an interior offensive line. It will be. Iowa must replace James Daniels. They must replace Sean Welsh. Both are heading to the NFL. If Keegan Render still inside, could play guard, could play center. A lot of that depends on what happens with the players around him. But Iowa, when they struggled offensively on the line the last couple of years, it was primarily at that interior line spot. They struggled to get a push going, had problems with them establishing run in some games, did have some problems with pass rush in that regard. Think back to the Purdue game last year. That was a really big reason why. So they need to get that push going. When they get it, the running game seems to go pretty well. And so having to bring in 2 new starters at that spot is pretty tough, especially when the guys you're replacing are NFL caliber players. So that's one of the biggest questions for Iowa is with that running attack. I think it's a little underrated simply because that interior offensive line is a concern, and it's a concern that's not being talked about at the same level as you would get with like maybe a wide receiver or some of the other spots on the football team, but I think is almost as important as everything going else there. Eugene says, why hasn't a 2-deep been released for the spring yet? They haven't had a spring practice yet. My guess, Eugene, on all that is we'll get that when we speak with Kirk Ferentz on Tuesday for the introductory press conference for spring football. Wednesday, they have the first practice. My guess is we'll probably get that on Tuesday before the media meets the head coach. And also, it's the spring depth chart to start with. Man, I don't know if anything is more useless than that. Maybe if you get one right at the end of the season after the bowl game before the team goes into winter workouts. But it's a starting spot for the first rep in spring practice, and then 3 practices in. If a guy who's the second team starter is out playing the first, he's going to get the reps unless it's an established starter. If it's a wide-open position like linebacker, could flip-flop all over the place. If it's Nate Stanley, he's starting with the first team reps regardless. So, yeah, you'll get it then, but I wouldn't read too much into it. Steve says, yeah, he did my job. I'm assuming he's talking about Marshall Yanda to help him sell the program there to Noah Fenske. Yeah, it was a big moment for Noah. I mean, it made a big impact on him, not just with the commitment, but I think it's driving him to be a better player because he sees himself potentially as an NFL prospect and realizes Marshall Yanda isn't that much bigger than him. And so that if he works and grinds, he's got a shot at making it to the next level, which really, that's why I said earlier, I thought that was the best recruiting thing I was probably done in a while just because of the impact on the player. It's not only helped him land him, it helped to motivate the kid to be better than he probably thought he was going to be anyway. So it worked out perfectly. Brandon wants to know if anyone is transferring from the basketball team, and if so, when will we know? The short answer is yes. If you're going to follow that up with who are the names, I'm not certain yet, but it's college basketball. The average Division I team has 2 to 3 transfers a year, just based off of the numbers for the last couple of years. It's the world we live in. The transfer market is basically free agency for college basketball. Hits virtually every team every year for a couple guys. It'll hit Iowa for a couple. You can make the argument that it could be virtually everybody on the roster. So it's hard to pinpoint who it is for the team this year, but just know it'll probably be a couple guys when some point between now and probably May. I know it's a big window. Some guys want it out there right away so they can go find their next school the second the season ends. Some guys have no problem waiting until closer to the end of the semester to do it. Some guys just have it announced in April after they've already found their spot, after they've not publicly let it known they're out there, but it gets known through coaching circles, people talking to their AAU coach, their high school coaches, people around them. So it's going to be something that's going to slowly filter out. It's not going to be something like the Tyler Cook news where, boom, it's here and we know he's heading to the NBA to try to see if he can play himself into a first-round talent or not, be able to go there all the way. Next question from Steve says, we need an all-open offense. Assuming we're going back to talking football here, here's the thing with offense for this year. I think Iowa is going to have to rely on Nate Stanley early on. You're breaking in 2 new running backs, which isn't a big or whoever the new starting running back is, which isn't a big thing if you have an established line, but they don't have an established line yet. That may need some time to gel together. And then you look to the passing game. You have the tight ends, which is a good spot to start with. You have your quarterback with Nate, and wide receiver still a question mark. So if you're going to be able to move the ball early on through the air, which consistently you should be able to do with at least him and the tight ends, maybe a little bit more with the wide receivers, or at least you hope, that's on Nate to do, and you're going to have to wait for the running game to probably come around a little bit. That's my guess. Makes wide receiver, I think, be a little bit more urgent of a position for that to show up day one in a better spot than it's been the last 2 years, but a lot of that's going to fall on Nate for him to throw the ball in spots to ensure his guys are open, continue to make the right reads. He's a kid who only had a couple interceptions last year. There's very few times he made poor decisions with the ball. That's got to continue. Eugene says, who will develop as the wide receivers? That's a really good question, and it could be anybody on the roster they would take. Brandon Smith is the one name I would look at simply because they have nobody else who can play the split end position like he does. When you want to look at a size standpoint, anything like that, they need him to step up at that point, be the starter. From everything I've heard, he was looking really good through winter workouts. He's somebody the team wants to see what happens when he gets on the field. Looks in better shape. Everything you want for him is probably the player fans hoped he was last season that he just didn't get a chance to do. Another name I would keep an eye out for is Max Cooper. He only played a handful of snaps last year, but he's somebody who looked like he was a solid route runner. Every time I heard something about him, it was very positive. He just didn't see the field much, so he's somebody else to keep an eye on. And then Amir Smith-Marset, if he just catches the football, that solves a lot of his problems because he showed the ability to get behind the defense, to be the downfield threat. Just holding on to the football was a problem later in the season for him. So if he can kind of solve that, and I think an offseason might help him in that regard, get past whatever physical hurdles, mental hurdles, whatever that was last year. A few months without practice might be exactly what he needed to get back to being the player the coaching staff thought he was and talked him up to be during most of the season. Clint wants to know, can the defensive line be so dominant and disruptive that we may not have a feel for how good the linebackers are the first few games? I think if you're Iowa, that's the best case scenario, and that's something you're hoping for because it's going to probably take the linebackers a few games to come along, even in a best case scenario for the team, because you're breaking in 3 new guys, and it's 3 new guys who don't have a lot of experience. Iowa's going to need the line to clog up the offensive line, make sure the linebackers are free to move around to make tackles, get into the defensive backfield for penetration, whether it's stopping a running game there or just getting pressure on the quarterback, not just necessarily sacks, but making sure somebody's in his face, doesn't have time to throw the ball. 2, I think the linebacking core you'll see in the second half of the season, the final 6 regular season games, will be probably a lot better than the first 6, and that's irregardless of who ends up starting just because it's such a young and inexperienced group. Steve chimes in again and says Evans and Tracy will see time at running back. Wouldn't surprise me if Iowa plays some of the young guys or even somebody like Keyshawn Bryant, who redshirted last year just because, they only have a couple guys at the position who played last year. They were both young. They were both technically freshmen, whether it was Young as a redshirt freshman or that's the wrong one. Ivory Kelly Martin as a true freshman. So, you can almost say anybody could come in and claim that job of the guys that played last year will have the best start. Sean wants to know who will be the best linebackers. That's one that's going to take through fall camp to get an answer for. Nick Niemann is probably the guy you could say with the most certainty will start the year. And even that, I probably wouldn't put above maybe 60 or 65%. And the reason I named him is players were talking about him last year. He was the one backup when bowl practices were going on and all the senior linebackers got asked about all the players behind them. Everyone brought him up. And so you might go from Ben Niemann to his brother at the weak side linebacker spot. And everything else, and as for the other two, man, everything's up in the air. It could be Christian Welch. It could be Hockaday. You could have Amani Jones. You could have Dylan Doyle come in. You could have the two walk-ons from Iowa Western Community College play their way onto the depth chart. You could have somebody else who I've already forgotten. We have Jones there. Steve chimed in there. That's probably one of the names that I forgot. There's a lot of options they have there. And I think it's going to take, by the spring, you'll probably have a group of maybe 4 or 5 guys separate themselves as potential starters, and then it'll take the spring to figure that out. That's going to be a tough one. I think that one will go through the spring through at least one of those spots, if not 2. Eugene wants to know if Smith Marset will return kicks again. I think you could see him returning kicks. I think you could see Ivory Kelly Martin returning kicks because Ivory Kelly Martin handled some kickoff duty for last year and looked very good there. I think Iowa will have some options there. I think Tyrone Tracy might be a name you could do that. Samson Evans, who was somebody Steve just mentioned for potential playing time at running back, was a really good punt returner at Illinois High School this year. I know Evans, they wanted him initially to be a football player, or to be, a wide receiver, but he might have to come in and play running back off the bat from depth concerns. But he's a really good athlete and showed a lot as a returner the high school level in Illinois for Prairie Ridge High School. Michael Wilcox wants to know any update on David Bell and his recruitment of Iowa getting him. Michael, I've probably been the journalist who's been the lowest on Iowa's odds of getting him the entire time. He's an out-of-state player, top-end talent, has offers from Ohio State and Michigan. That's a hard formula for Iowa State to kind of find a way to win with. If they're going to win on a player who has those kind of offers and land him, it's usually an in-state player. They're kind of in unfamiliar territory here, a territory where the guy usually doesn't pick Iowa. So the positives for Iowa here is they were in early on him, a very good relationship with him. He wanted to come to the junior day. There was apparently a car accident, no major injuries, and he's apparently looking to come back for a visit at some point down the road. But I have a hard time seeing how Iowa's going to land him when the 2 top teams historically in the conference are also there for him. See what happens. Hopefully you make the final list for him. I think that's the next step for Iowa with them because he's already been to campus multiple times. He's done a lot of the things you want to see. It's just it's going to be a hard guy to land. If they land him, I've said this multiple times, I think that'll go down as Iowa's best recruiting effort, quite possibly in the entire Kirk Ferentz era, just with everything that goes around with it, even though he won't be the highest signed recruit that they will have. Ryan says predictions to what their record might be. Seems like they should be battling Wisconsin for the West. Wisconsin will be the top team. Their schedule will get tougher this year, so it might make them tougher to come through. It's hard to predict this early on when we haven't seen any growth or anything from them. I would probably peg them as a 7 to 8 win team, and they would have a chance to improve that number if we can find out that Iowa has shown the ability, or at least the confidence of multiple wide receivers to be playmakers for them this season. If they have an idea of maybe what 1 or 2 of those cornerback spots are, and if they have an idea of what they want to see on the offensive line. Cornerback, you have to replace Josh Jackson. I'm not as concerned there because there's a lot of options there, and a lot of options for players who are incoming guys who are 4-star talent who are very good, or someone like Manny Ugumba, who played very well his freshman year and you would think should bounce back after kind of a sophomore slump, or somebody like Josh Turner, who the staff was very high on after his redshirt year. He almost played last year, almost beat out Matt Hankins, but they only wanted to play one of the new guys, and so he had to redshirt. So they have a lot of guys there, so I'm not as concerned about cornerback, but you got to see what happens at linebacker, on the O-line, and then at wide receiver, I think, to be more optimistic for them coming out of spring ball. Eugene says, spring is the time to build a punter out of spare parts. I know the fans are going to think this is weird, but Ryan Gersandi, I think, is fine. His numbers from last year, which I don't have directly in front of me, were good. You would take them out of the starting Big Ten punter, from the average to the distance he got to everything there. He just got hurt last year, and that forced Iowa to play a walk-on. Now, Kirk started the year with a walk-on, but when they turned to Gersandi, he, for the most part, was pretty good. So I think if he comes into the season healthy, I think he solved Iowa's punting rules. I know fans are going to need to see it to believe it, but I think they'll be fine on punter. I think they'll be better off than people expect it to be. Eugene wants to know who emerges as the backup quarterback. That's another one of those under-the-radar battles that I think will be pretty good. Peyton Manziel had a year in the system already, which is a benefit to him. Spencer Petras is everybody's favorite quarterback because he's the four-star who his entire highlight tape is just him throwing bombs downfield. And, I think that's going to be another one that's probably going to have to go into fall camp a little bit, because my guess would be Peyton will have the leg up throughout spring practice. But my guess is Spencer, he came in early to get a grasp of the offense. I think he'll have an idea of it early in spring camp, but by the time he goes through the summer and gets the fall practice, he'll have a better shot of it. And so if Spencer's going to take that job, I think he ends up taking it early on in the fall. So I think that'll go there for a while there. But there's two interesting guys. I know a lot of fans just have assumed Spencer's going to be the guy, but Iowa likes Peyton. They like what they have in him, and they like what they've seen from him. I think that'll be a really interesting battle that'll go down for a while. Steve chimes in that 45-yard average for Gersandi. He said he was above 40. I knew he was above 40, but I didn't know if he hit 45. So thanks, everybody there. Ryan, my pleasure for answering your questions. What else do we have? Sean says, is it possible Oliver Martin leaves Michigan and comes to Iowa? I know this is something I've heard a couple times from fans on here. I haven't heard anything concrete on that. I know that's a rumor that's just out there. But from where I'm sitting right now, without any real evidence on anything for it, that's just kind of a Michigan equivalent of the Tyler Cook to Missouri one. Kid, home state, may not play as much as people think. If he ever decided to transfer out of Michigan, Iowa would certainly be a possibility. But I don't know if that's where things sit with Oliver Martin at all right now. If you have any more questions, feel free to throw them in there. Otherwise, we're hitting towards the end of everything. So I will tell everybody, be sure to check out tomorrow morning. I have a feature on Ezra Miller, Iowa's four-star 2019 commit, the top player in the class. He earned offensive line MVP honors going out to the opening in San Francisco this past week. So, earlier this month. So I talked to him about kind of his mindset on what happens when he goes to those kind of showcase camps and what he tries to do. It was a really interesting conversation. He was very candid and open about it. So be sure to check that out. I think everybody will like it. Steve chimes in and says Peyton is second now. Yes. Yeah, Peyton's kind of going to be second regardless by default, because they're not going to put a freshman as second regardless, even if the freshman was Joe Montana 2.0 or Tom Brady 2.0. Ryan says, talk about how the offense could potentially be improved in Brian's second year. How good do I think Brian's offense can be eventually? We're talking top three in the conference, or more like the best O'Keefe years. A lot of that, I think in 2 or 3 years, it could be really, really good, because you've got a lot of young pieces that are coming in there. You have Noah Fant as a sophomore. You have Nate Stanley as a sophomore. You have young guys at running back. They really like the wide receivers, whether it's the guys who were in the class of 2017 or the guys in 2018. You have Tristan Wirfs, Alaric Jackson as tackles. They have Ezra Miller coming in at offensive tackle. That entire 2019 offensive line class they already have set up could be very, very good. So I think in time you have a really good chance for it. I think the improvement for this year is tied really into the wide receivers for the most part, because the inability to get separation and have playmakers at wide receiver handcuffed Iowa from the passing standpoint. Everybody knew it was going to be Nick Geasley underneath, and it was going to be the tight end. And if you could limit that and take that away, they had to rely on the run, and then you could kind of load the box, and that was a problem. They have to get the wide receiver self first for it to be a, what I would call an average Big Ten offense, or the average kind of offense that you would expect for Iowa to have. And then the running game stuff I was talking about was a secondary concern there. The other thing I think you want to see from Brian is he focused a lot on being not predictable this past year. I think to the point that it might have hurt them a little bit where you want to see them do things so they don't have tendencies, but at the same time, if you're in 2nd and 7, running the ball there's not a bad idea to set up 3rd and short. They threw the ball a lot in situations like that. Go look back at the Wisconsin game. That was kind of everything that happened there. So Steve says Jenkins too for the O-line. Yeah, he's a really good one. I know 247 had him as a 4-star. He had a lot of good guys up front. But so I think if you're Iowa, I think you just have to, take what's there sometimes a little bit more than doing something to ensure that you have an unpredictable nature a little bit. It's better to be too unpredictable than predictable, which everyone at Iowa saw for the last several years there. So I think you'll take it, but I think they can kind of tweak that back a little bit. And I think it's hard to predict the long-term stuff because you also have to factor in Brian's growth as a play caller, and that's hard to see until we see him out there for this past year, for this upcoming season too, not just with the players too. Eugene says, thanks for the info. Yeah, thanks for chiming in. Says, what do I know about the new helmet? Not too much on there, simply that I know there's a lot of people who are designing helmets or doing things with head safety with their helmets, and Iowa went with somebody that was big for it. I will say this, I think it's a good move for Iowa. Everybody wants to talk about player safety helmets, concussions. Iowa's known as being an old school staff. 2 years ago, Phil Parker kind of went off on a rant about you need more hitting, going back to the old days in football, but at the same time, anything you can do to help your players with avoid concussions, head safety, anything like that, teams should do. And Iowa being on the forefront of this, I think is good for them. It can help them, not just with players, everything on that front with the current guys from a health standpoint, but I think you can sell it on the recruiting trail too. Hey, Mom, you're concerned about head injuries, concussions, all that stuff that's been in the news the last couple of years, or Dad, if you have the same issues. By the way, we're the only team in football as of right now that's using this helmet that's supposed to help with that. We're doing everything we can to ensure your child's safety on that front. So I think that helps for them there too. And Ross says, will Iowa beat Nebraska again this year? That one's really too early to call because it depends on what Scott Frost does with the players he has there. He looks like a really good coach, but just based off of what you saw last year from his team. So I need to see what he does with the pieces they have there. On paper, Iowa should probably beat them again, but I would not be shocked if he's able to put together an offense that can kind of go up and down the field a little bit on some teams like you saw out of Purdue last year. Because like with Brom, he's known for having a spread offense that scores points. So Iowa probably should win and be the favorite, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's a closer game come November than you think it is today. So that's it for all the questions, everybody. Thank you for joining in. Thank you for all the questions. I appreciate it. And thanks, everybody. We'll catch you next time. All right. Bye.